Hi you guys, so in today's video, this is going to kind of be a general overview. I want to explain the purpose of each layer and kind of break down some of the terminology. I have a lot of brand new students, and I do try to explain in my full series as I'm going along kind of what we're doing, and realizing that some people might not know exactly what that means. So this is going to be a very beginner video just to break down what things mean and what they are. I am going to try to do them in the order that I do them on a baby. And because I'm creating hyper realism, there is not like a 10-step process like with beginner tutorials where I can say, you know, do these 10 layers and then you're finished. I really need to adjust every single layer as I go, but I'm going to do my best to explain at least what each layer means to you guys. So after the kit is ready to go, the very first thing that I do are veins. I feel like veins are pretty self-explanatory. They're made to be light, so that they just kind of peek through. This would be a vein. And then obviously I show exactly how to do that in my videos. But the purpose of doing veining is so that they show through a little bit at the end for more depth. The next thing I would do would be undertones. Sometimes I do some yellow undertones. Generally, most of the kits nowadays are yellow enough. They come very yellow. So I don't do a lot of yellow undertones. But undertones refer basically to shadows. Anything that you would see a little bit through the skin. I would normally do blue undertones here, corner of the eyes, and I think actually on this test head you can see a little bit in here, under the chin, and over here. The purpose of doing undertones is so that you get more realism. You want those natural thin skin shadows that show through so that you can see them a little bit when the baby is finished. It just adds realism and it adds depth. The next thing are capillaries. Capillaries are these little lines that I use this brush for. Usually I do them in red. And they are micro veins, very small veins, and are just another realism feature. I usually do them on the eyelids, in the ears here, and on the cheeks as well. So when those are done, those are like our base layers, the thing that every single baby is gonna get. And then we do about 90% of our painting are what I call depth layers. Let me just show you quickly the type of sponges that I use to create that. Those are the very small pattern sponges, or these sponges. Some artists do call these texture layers. I do not call them texture layers because they're not creating texture. Texture is what we create at the very end of our process when we have a texture that we can feel and a visible texture. These create depth, which is slight variations in the baby's overall tone, which adds to realism. And so I use these sponges for depth. I use these types of sponges and these, oh, hello Tate, sorry about that. And these little tiny sponges here. Depth is a little bit difficult to explain, but it is what makes your baby look like a real baby versus a painted factory doll. I do want to explain the difference between depth and model. So the biggest difference is going to be the sponge patterns, I guess, in, I guess, the biggest difference in the way that we're doing them. Okay, so this would be a modeling sponge. You could tell that it has a much larger pattern than a depth layer sponge. And we also use these kind of sponges to create depth. Anything that has very tiny little holes that will give us some variation in the amount of coverage that we get. So like I said, about 90% of the layers we're going to do are depth layers. And I try to explain that when I'm doing these series. I'm like, all right, guys, here's another depth layer, because we are doing a ton of them. They're not only creating depth, but they're also giving us our skin tone. So when it comes to colors for depth patterns, I obviously have colors that I use in, that I use a lot, kind of my favorite colors, but it is really difficult for me to tell you guys exactly what color you need to use, because I don't know what your baby looks like. You guys know I do a ton of different color reds. I do some blues. I do purples. I'll do greens. It really depends, but the majority of the layers are those depth layers. And then when I have a good amount of depth that I want, then I kind of really start looking at the color of the baby. I'm looking at it throughout the process. If I'm noticing that this baby is looking too blue, I'm not going to do more blue layers. I might do some depth layers that have warm tones. But the color choices are a lot more random in the very beginning as we're just building up all of that depth. When I do my modeling layers, I don't do as many model layers. Model is different. I'll show you a photo of modeling on a real baby. Model layers, you're going to have darker pigmented paint and you're going to leave a more noticeable pattern. Our depth layers any single layer of a depth layer should not be super visible. All these layers are going to work together and give us overall depth and tone. So, I always say this, the first 10 layers, you shouldn't really see anything. And then all of a sudden they start coming together. You'll see all these variations of colors. If you look up close, you will see little patterns, where, there might be some bare vinyl still poking through. And, you'll see, all of the different colors that we used, trying to kind of show through a little bit, contributing to the overall tone. So I just want to show you the pattern really quickly. So this would be like a depth layer. You can't really see it in the light. You could see it. For a model, I'll just use this sponge here, and let's use this super dark color so that you guys can actually see what I'm talking about, the difference. So this would be a model pattern. It's much larger and you'll be able to see it. So when I'm going on my painting process and I'm telling you guys, okay, here's another depth layer, here's another depth layer, here's another depth layer. Those layers, they don't have a purpose necessarily individually. Individually, they're not going to leave a noticeable pattern. Individually, they're not going to change the color of your baby. But when you have so many of those all working together, the end result, you will 100% be able to see all of those layers. A model pattern, you should be able to see it as soon as you put it on. And I really want you guys to be able to get to the point where you can look at your baby and you can say, does it have enough depth? What does it need now? I'm going to be 100% honest. That comes with a lot of time and experience. That's probably the biggest feedback I get from people, or the biggest question that I get is, what do I do now? I don't know what I should do. I don't know what colors I should use. When you're a beginner, that's okay. I would really recommend, you know, if you're just starting out, take one of my tutorials, follow it completely from start to finish. Don't worry about doing anything on your own. Just focus on following exactly what I'm teaching you, and then at the end really take a good look at it, and you'll be able to see how everything we did came together, and that will really help to build your own foundation so that when you're going forward, you don't have to follow tutorials, that you can look at your baby and you can say, oh, you know, she's looking pretty orange, I think I need to do a blue layer, or she's looking pretty flat, I think I need to do some more depth layers. Things like that. It does not come quickly, it does not come overnight, but everything that we're doing now is giving you the foundation to be able to create high-end babies. So after we do all of our depth layers, which, as I've said multiple times, there are many. That is what we're spending almost all of our time doing, is creating depth. The side effect of those depth layers is that it's also putting some color on the baby. So when we get enough depth, we're going to take a look at our baby and see, what does this overall tone look like? Is it a nice neutral tone? Does the baby look orange? Does the baby look a little bit too cool, like blue or purple toned, where you might need to do a yellow? At that point, I know my painting style is different than others. I do not typically do washes. I don't want to cover up all that amazing depth that I've spent weeks creating. So if there is a point where I look and I go, oh, okay, I'm happy with the overall depth, but the color is not what I want it to be. There's a couple different things that I'll do. The first one is I will do more depth layers, because you can never have too much depth. So I will take my small sponges, and depending on, let's say that Courtney here was too red, because I've done all of these red layers and now she's red, and that's fine. We're not neutralizing through the process, we're adding depth. If you spent all your time trying to neutralize each color, you would have zero depth. So when we get all that depth, she's much too red. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to do a depth layer, maybe a couple, and I would want to do green. I do have videos talking about neutralizing, and neutralizing as we go, and this is neutralizing as we go. So I would put green on my depth layer. I would do a bunch of, you know, all over with my very tiny pattern of green, trying to neutralize that red. I would bake it, take a look, kind of assess, does she still look too red? Does she still, you know, does she need anything else? And I would just continue with that process until I have the skin tone that I want, where I'm happy with my skin tone. I also sometimes use these big fat cosmetic wedges. I will tear them off, I'll put the color on, and I will pounce it on. Pouncing literally just means blotting. And so I will just keep doing that with whatever colors I need to be doing. I know that it's kind of hard to explain, because I'm just trying to explain these and I don't have a good example right now, you know, to demonstrate, but it's going to vary baby to baby. I get a lot of requests for like me to write out the steps of reborning, like use these colors and you're good to go. That is not reborning. That is not going to be the case. I use different colors on every baby. Vinyl colors are different. So, you know, the colors that you need on each baby are different. The colors that you mix every time are different. So, you know, sometimes I'll mix reds and I end up with a baby not too red. Other times I'll mix the same reds and that baby looks red. when you get experience, and I would say probably like a year at least of reborning very consistently, these are things that you're going to be able to start recognizing on your own and be able to do without guidance. But you're not expected as a beginner to be able to do that without guidance, which is why I give you guys so much guidance. Okay, so we do more depth layers. Maybe we do what I call a waddle, which is this because it's not a wash. A wash is where you take a paintbrush, you dip it in your paint, and you brush it on the entire baby, and then you pounce off any excess, or you blend it in with the big brush. A lot of artists paint like that. I personally do not paint like that. The reason that I do not do washes is because I specialize in Caucasian skin tones. I am focusing on realism, so I want a lot of depth. If I spend weeks creating all this depth and then I cover it up with paint all the way over, basically what I'm doing is all that time I spent building up these slight variations in color, I'm just covering it completely, and I'm going to lose a lot of my depth. So I don't do those. But I will do, you know, these other things that I've talked about that will give us a good overall skin color. Another thing that we do, and this we do throughout the whole process, is shading. I shade inside the nostrils to give a look of realism. The philtrum, this is the philtrum right here, this center piece in between the lips. I mean, you know, between the lips and the nose, that little divot. I do the ear canals there. And that is throughout the entire process. It's not one layer, just like everything else is not one time or 3 times. It's as many times as we need to do it. Other things that we do throughout the whole process is blushing. This is blushing areas that are pinker. We do fingers, any areas on the body that have blood flow in that area, which makes the skin look pink or red in that area. So we do blushing throughout the whole thing. I build blushing up slowly. I find that it looks a lot more realistic than if, let's see if we can do this really quickly with this one here. Actually, I'm going to grab a different paint for this. All right, so, okay, this side you can tell, hopefully you can tell. I mean, this is just a test head, but I have done almost a full painting on it, using it in other videos to demonstrate like really specific things. This is blushing that I've built up slowly over time. For this demonstration, I'm just going to use Call Oils. This is Jessica's blush color, her custom color. So what a lot of artists do, and again, I do not do this, but I want to show you guys why. A lot of artists don't do any blushing until the very end. They will take their blush. Oh, wow. Sorry about that. And they will just do one blush layer, a darker blush layer. So I don't know if you guys can really tell on camera. When you do like a whole blush layer like that, you have good full coverage. It doesn't look like a real flush of the cheek, which is why I build it up like this really slowly. So you'll see me do a whole bunch of different blush layers. Towards the very end, I might do a darker blush layer than we've done before if it's almost where I want it, but I feel like I just want to kind of emphasize that a little bit more. So you know, the whole goal with the way that I paint is realism as much as possible. So after we've done our veining, undertones, capillaries. We spend a ton of time doing depth layers. We'll do some model layers. During all of that, I'll be doing lip layers, blush layers, shading layers, and of course creases. I do not do a single layer of creases. I want creases to look natural. For anybody who maybe doesn't know, this is a crease. Creases are lines that are sculpted into the kit. If you do a dark layer on your creases, let's just use this one for an example. If you do a dark crease, and I know right now my light is super bright, it does not look realistic. They can look dirty and they look too dark. You want your creases to be light and just look like natural shadows of creases, not like a dark slash line. Nothing eliminates realism more than creases that are way too dark. So that is something that we do through the whole process. And again, there is no magic number. That's something that I'm looking at every time I'm doing a layer and saying, okay, are these creases dark enough, or do I need to add more? And these are things, again, also at the end that everything gets like a good once over, like what else does this baby need? So assume everything looks great. I might do some milia, which I have videos on how to do that. And then I'm going to do a texture layer. Again, texture is this is skin texture. So I create skin texture by usually using one of these. I tear it and I'll use my varnish and pounce it on and create a nice pattern. There are other detail things, of course, I do at the end, like milk blisters. I would do that with my milia, lanugo, things like that. But right now I'm kind of trying to focus on painting layers. So after texture, the baby is done being painted. I really wish that this was like a paint by numbers situation. If I was creating budget babies, where realism was not my focus, I could 100% give you guys a list and tell you do these 10 layers and then you're done. But I really want you guys to start getting into the mindset. I want you guys to start researching, watching videos, really looking at photos of real babies, so that you can be able to look at your own work and tell what it still needs and where you need to go. I know there's a lot of people with issues identifying vinyl colors. I do have that in my neutralizing video, but again, this stuff really just comes with experience. Please just follow along, especially if you're struggling. And I've seen quite a few people that follow multiple different artists. And the biggest thing I can say is that my painting style is very different from other artists. If you're mixing in other artists' methods with mine, you're not going to get the result that I've gotten. And I do get that a lot. People are like, oh, I followed your tutorial. My baby doesn't look anything like this. It looks different. You know, I did everything you did, but then I did, 10 washes or, things that are not what I'm showing. So I really recommend follow me 100% from start to finish so that you can see what each layer does for your baby, what the end result of all those layers working together looks like. And then if you want to start implementing other methods, other colors, other things, do that. But I want you guys to be able to see what you can create start to finish from following me first, and then you can branch out. I want you guys to develop your own styles and, you know, your own methods, but you do need to have a good foundation before you can start doing that. All right, you guys, I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them below and I'll do my best to answer them.